My name is Eloise Marnell, and I know how it feels to be reduced to a punchline. The first time I heard it, she's basically just a social security check with a cardigan. I was standing in my own kitchen bringing out lemonade for my son and his friends. They didn't know I was there yet. I guess they thought I was too old to hear them from the hallway, or maybe they thought I was too old to understand it all. They laughed. Not just my son Grayson, but his buddies too, grown men my age or close to it. They were gathered in the backyard after one of those neighborhood golf charity things, sipping beers and slapping each other's backs like they were still in college. She's basically furniture with a pulse, Grayson added. I froze. I held the lemonade tray like a fool and felt my knuckles go numb. I didn't walk in right away. I didn't say a word. I waited until the subject changed, then opened the sliding door like nothing had happened. I still smiled as I set down the tray. So before you sit down and listen, I whispered to myself, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Because this story, you might actually regret missing out on what happened next. You see, I wasn't always the old woman in the back cottage. I once ran a public library for 41 years. I cataloged thousands of books, solved problems no one else could, mentored teenagers who had nowhere else to go. I kept a mental inventory of every title and knew when a spine had been moved half an inch. I noticed things. When Grayson suggested I move into the small cottage behind his house after my hip replacement, I thought it was love. I'd raised him alone after all. His father passed from a heart attack when Grayson was 11. We made it through everything: high school, college applications, even the failure of his first business. I sold my car to help him pay off his credit card debt once. That was never spoken of again. So when he said, "You shouldn't be alone, Mom," I believed him. The cottage wasn't luxurious, but it was warm. I had my books, my cat Mabel, and a view of his boys playing baseball in the yard. I thought we were healing old wounds by simply living near each other. I didn't know then that to Grayson proximity meant access. It began subtly. He offered to set up my bank app, saying it would simplify things. He encouraged me to let him manage the utility bills, bundle everything under one account. It all sounded so reasonable. I was recovering. I trusted him. Then he asked to help with my Social Security deposits. "We'll just have everything routed through one channel, Mom," he said, waving a manila folder like it was gospel. I signed. And slowly I stopped receiving statements. I would ask, and he'd say, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's all digital now." Or, "I moved it to savings for you." Or, "You're spending less anyway." Once I asked why there were overdraft alerts on my phone. He blinked, genuinely irritated. "You probably clicked something weird again," he said, grabbing the phone from my hands. "You're always touching things that don't need to be touched." It stung. Not just the condescension, but the speed at which he turned my concern into a flaw. As if my aging hands were the problem, not his tightening grip around my life. Still, I stayed quiet. Until I heard the joke. Until I realized I was not just invisible, but laughable. It was that night I sat at my tiny kitchen table and pulled out my old notebook from the drawer. The same kind I used as a librarian. I hadn't touched it since retirement. I flipped to a fresh page. January. He joked about my value. February. Signed over deposit access. March. Overdraft 1. I wrote every month like a chapter. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just wrote. Because once you've been cataloged like furniture, the only way out is to write your own story. And trust me, the best stories start quiet, then break the room open. I wasn't always quiet, you know. People think quiet means weak. That silence is surrender. But silence is a strategy. It's a ledger. It's the sound of a mind cataloging every insult, every omission, every unspoken theft. Grayson didn't know that when he said, "It's just old lady money, Mom." We were sitting at the dining room table. His dining room, not mine. It was tax season, and he was glancing through his laptop while the kids yelled at a video game in the next room. His wife Janine handed me a mug of tea like I was a guest, not family. I hated chamomile. She knew that. "I'm just trying to make your life easier," he said, not looking at me. "You don't need to think about all that paperwork. You're on a fixed income anyway, right?" "Right," I echoed, though I didn't feel fixed. I felt suspended. Like I was drifting in a space that used to be mine. He clicked a few more keys. Oh, and I moved your SSI into the family account so we can manage things together. I'll give you cash if you need anything extra. That word extra, like the money I worked for contributed to earned across decades, was now an accessory. Like I was lucky to get an allowance for existing. I pressed my hand against the mug, not drinking, just anchoring myself. He was using my own stability to stabilize himself, and he didn't even flinch when he said it. I went back to the cottage that evening and wrote it down. April. My income now requires permission. That week, I tried to test the waters. I called Social Security to ask if I could see my benefits breakdown. I got the automated runaround, so I tried to log in online. The password had been changed. When I asked Grayson about it, he sighed the way people sigh at toddlers who spilled juice. Mom, I told you. I set that up under my email so nothing gets lost. You're not great with passwords. It wasn't the first time he made decisions for me like that. But this time, it didn't feel like protection. It felt like expropriation. I was a citizen again of the quiet country of women who give too much and are thanked too little. I took a walk that night, just to get out. The stars were sharp. I remembered a quote from a library display we once made. Abuse doesn't always come with bruises. Sometimes it's a withdrawal slip. In May, I started asking to see the bank statements. Grayson deflected. I'll print them later. I'll show you next week. You're getting anxious, Mom. Maybe it's time we talk about medication. There it was. The pivot to questioning my sanity. I smiled. Because that too, I wrote down, May, denied statements, suggested medication. I started keeping cash. Every time he handed me money for groceries, I didn't spend all of it. I squirreled some away into a hollowed-out Jane Eyre on my shelf. I bought an old phone at a pawn shop and set it up with a new Gmail. I emailed myself copies of everything I could get my hands on, photos of the check stubs. I still had notes, screenshots of texts, names. By June, I started noticing he was joking about me more. Not just around me, but to me. You and your cat are like some sitcom. No one asked to be renewed. You should sell stories to AARP Mom if they still believe you're all there. I told the guys, you don't even know what day it is sometimes. That got a laugh. I didn't respond. But I did take photos of those joke texts. He always sent them after he drank. Little messages he probably forgot by morning. That night, I checked his Facebook. It was public. So was his private group with friends. Dad Bros United. And there it was. A meme of a wrinkled woman holding a Social Security check with the caption, "Government handouts." Because Grandma survived the Great Depression but can't survive without my Wi-Fi password. Grayson had liked it, commented, "Sounds familiar." The comments were full of laughing emojis. I stared at it for a long time. Then I screenshotted the page, sent it to my secret email, and made myself a cup of coffee at 2 a. Not tea. Not anymore. Something inside me hardened not into rage, but into resolve. You see, I knew something Grayson didn't. People who organize their lives around power often forget the quiet ones watching. And I had been watching for too long. The punchline. It wasn't me. It was coming. There was a time when Grayson looked at me with awe. He was 7 years old when he ran into my library after school, gripping his dinosaur folder like it held state secrets. Mom, he whispered with urgency, do you know where the books about meteorites are? I pointed without looking up. Third aisle left corner, second shelf from the bottom. Between volcanology and paleontology, his eyes went wide. How do you always know that? I smiled then, because I listen and I remember. He ran off like I had handed him treasure. Back then he thought my brain was a superpower. Now he thinks it's deteriorating. That shift, the way reverence becomes ridicule, is one of life's quietest betrayals. I hadn't meant to raise a cruel son, but cruelty, I've learned, often comes disguised in efficiency. It starts as help becomes control, then festers into dismissal. Still, part of me ached for that memory. The boy who once built me a Mother's Day card out of macaroni and glitter saying, "You're better than Google." That's who I raised. That's who I lost. July was a hard month. The heat crept into the cottage like a punishment, and my old fan coughed more than it cooled. I asked Grayson if we could replace it. He looked up from his phone. We'll have to wait until next month's deposits. We're tight this cycle. We're tight. His house was getting solar panels installed. Janine had posted about their eco-conscious upgrade online, hashtagging it, "Good energy, good life." The irony made me nauseous. I retreated to my notebook that evening. July. Fan request denied. Luxury upgrades continue. Mabel, my cat, pressed against my leg as I wrote. She was my only constant. She never judged the slowness in my step, never sighed when I repeated myself. That night I couldn't sleep. The air was thick and sour. I opened all the windows and sat by the door listening to cicadas drone like distant sirens. That's when I noticed the trash bin. Grayson had left it open after bringing out garbage. Among the wrappers and soda cans, I spotted a shredded envelope, one with my name on it. I waited until the house lights went off, then walked barefoot through the grass and fished it out. It was the remains of a Social Security mailer, the kind that breaks down your benefits each year. I gathered the scraps in a shoebox and spent an hour piecing it back together on my table like a jigsaw puzzle of humiliation. The numbers didn't match what Grayson said I was receiving. I was eligible for more. He was keeping the difference. That's when I stopped wondering whether this was just mismanagement and started seeing it as theft. August. Confirmed underpayment. Benefits diverted. The next day I said nothing. I made scrambled eggs. I watched the boys play catch. I offered Janine some fresh tomatoes from my planter, and I smiled, because something inside me had clicked into place. When you catalog enough damage, it becomes evidence. And I was building a case. I started calling the Social Security office from my burner phone, timing the calls when Grayson was at work. I spoke to a woman named Miss Rodriguez who had the softest voice I'd ever heard from a government employee. She confirmed that my account had been modified with a power of attorney document signed last year. I never signed anything of the sort, I said. Silence. She promised to investigate, asked for a copy of my ID and any proof of tampering. I mailed it all from a post office 2 towns away. Meanwhile, Grayson kept parading me like a prop. At church, he'd say Mom's doing so great now that we're handling her care. At barbecues, he'd bring me a folding chair like it was a throne. At home, he reminded me not to touch the thermostat too much because we're trying to keep energy costs down. He even installed a smart meter and linked it to his phone. I was monitored, metered, managed. But I wasn't helpless. One night, as I dusted off a framed photo of my younger self on my retirement day, surrounded by students and stacks of books, I whispered to the glass, "You're not done yet." And neither am I. Because the truth was about to turn. I just needed one more piece. The piece came wrapped in something banal, a utility bill. Grayson had dropped it off on my counter like usual, like I was some tenant in his name. "Just sign this, Mom," he said. "It's to confirm the annual energy usage." I looked at the paper rows of numbers, dates, line items. But in the top right corner, I saw it. Not my name, not even the house address. The account was under Grayson Marnell, primary guardian. Guardian. I had never signed a guardianship form. I had never been declared unfit. Yet here it was in clean, unassuming print on a bill that would have passed unnoticed by someone who didn't read every line like a reference catalog. That word thudded in my chest like a gavel. Guardian. He'd changed more than the password. He'd changed the narrative. I placed the paper on the table beside my shoebox of evidence. Clippings, notes, photos, now bills. And I realized I had enough. I wasn't sure yet how I would strike, but I knew I couldn't keep waiting for one more insult to round out the portrait. The picture was already complete. Still, the next insult came anyway. It always does. Grayson came into the cottage a few days later without knocking. I was in my robe sipping instant coffee, Mabel curled on my lap. He stood in the doorway like a landlord checking on a lease. "You've been a little distant lately," he said, pacing. "Janine's worried." "She shouldn't be," I replied evenly. He waved a hand. "We just want to make sure you're not slipping, Mom. You've been forgetful." There it was, forgetful. The cruelest word you can aim at someone with a full memory. "I remember what matters," I said, locking eyes with him. He gave a half smile. "Well, that's the thing." Janine mentioned that maybe we should consider preemptively exploring assisted care options. Just in case. I didn't blink. "You mean before I forget how to write checks?" He froze, then recovered. "It's not about money." "Of course not," I murmured. Why would it be? He reached for a picture frame on my bookshelf, one of me and him back when he graduated college. His eyes lingered on it, then drifted to the side table where I'd left a pen and envelope. He picked up the envelope. You writing letters? He asked. Always, I replied. Some stories don't end unless you write the last line yourself. He didn't know how to respond to that. Just placed the envelope back and muttered something about dinner on Sunday. After he left, I opened the envelope. Inside was a printed screenshot I had just received that morning from Miss Rodriguez. It was the fraudulent power of attorney document. Signed, Eloise Marnell. Date: a week I had been in the hospital recovering from surgery, unconscious recovering from anesthesia. That week he had forged my signature. I printed it, highlighted it, labeled it. September. Legal forgery confirmed. Then I went a step further. I reached out to a friend, Janet Bell, an old co-worker from the library who had retired to Raleigh. Janet's daughter was a paralegal. Within 3 days, she sent me a name: Margot Dunn, elder law specialist. I called. Margot listened carefully. Then quietly said, Eloise, I see this kind of thing more often than you'd believe, and we can fight it. I cried. Not because I was sad, but because someone believed me. We made a plan. I would not confront Grayson directly. I would play the part, gather a few final documents, and wait. But inside, the storm was gathering. I cooked a pie for the boys that week. I joined Janine for grocery errands. I listened patiently when Grayson complained about entitled boomers during a podcast he left playing on his kitchen speaker. And I smiled. Because every great reversal starts with a lull. He thought I was fading, but I was curating, and soon he would learn. You don't erase a woman who once archived the entire town's history. You just remind her how to file things under justice. October brought with it a kind of clarity, like when summer's haze finally lifts and you see the bones of the trees again. That's how my life looked now. Honest. Ready. The days grew cooler. Grayson turned the heat down for budget reasons. I didn't argue. I just layered scarves, sweaters, socks thicker than trust. I wasn't cold. I was preparing. That week I made copies of everything. The fake power of attorney. The altered Social Security records. The shredded letter I had pieced together like forensic origami. I cataloged it all, each file neatly labeled digitally and on paper. I didn't need to confront him anymore. I just needed to complete the mosaic. But Grayson, ever the fool in a crown of confidence, didn't stop himself from giving me one final puzzle piece. It came in the form of a family meeting. He called me into the main house. The boys were at their grandmother's. Janine was perched on the couch, like she had been practicing her expression of concern. I've been doing some research, Grayson began like a TED Talk nobody asked for, and I think it's time we consider signing some long-term documents, advanced directives, medical proxies, all that. He looked at me, the way people look at packages they haven't opened yet. Possessive curious, entitled. Janine nodded. It's just a formality, really. A precaution, he added. So you're taken care of no matter what. I tilted my head, folded my hands. And who would be doing the taking care of? Grayson's smile didn't touch his eyes. Well, I've already been handling things, so this would just make it official. Janine handed me a folder, thick paper, a notary stamp. You want me to sign this now? I asked gently. No pressure. Janine lied. I opened the folder. I read the document slowly aloud like I was reading to the boys when they were small. It granted Grayson full control over my finances, health decisions, living arrangements. Immediate effect. Irrevocable. I looked up. You know, I said softly, I always wondered how betrayals really happen. Turns out it's not with shouting. It's with clip art and legalese. Grayson frowned. What's that supposed to mean? I'll need time, I said, handing the folder back. A decision like this shouldn't be rushed. He pressed his lips together, clearly displeased. But he nodded. Okay, of course. Take a few days. I stood up. I think I'll take the week. As I left, I noticed Janine mouthing something to Grayson. I couldn't hear her, but I didn't need to. I knew that tone. I had heard it years ago when a coworker discovered someone was stealing from the petty cash drawer and didn't want to believe it was her friend. Doubt. It had entered the room. Back in the cottage, I added a new line to the notebook. October. attempted coercion into guardianship contract. Then finally, I pulled out the old checkbook, the one I had hidden inside the back cover of a dusty copy of Middlemarch. It had only been used twice in the past 2 years, but the account still lived. It was the account my husband and I opened when Grayson was born. It was also the account Grayson forgot about. I wrote 2 checks, one to Margot's legal office, the other to myself. Then I called Margot. "It's time," I said. She instructed me to meet her the next morning with everything I had. I placed the folder into my tote bag, zipped it with the reverence of a woman carrying not evidence, but resurrection. That night, I slept deeper than I had in months. Mabel curled beside me. No heat, just breath quiet and warm. In the morning, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Hair neatly brushed, eyes alert. Not old, not defeated, not dependent. Prepared. Because you see, when people tell the same joke enough times, they forget. There might be someone in the room taking notes. And eventually, the setup leads to a punchline. But not for me, for him. Margot's office was in a modest brick building downtown, nestled between a dry cleaner and an old bakery that still used paper bags. No frills, no distractions. Just brass numbers on the door and a quiet kind of confidence that reminded me of a well-run library. I liked it immediately. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a pot of chamomile tea. "I prefer coffee," I said with a small smile. She grinned. "Noted." We sat across from each other, my folder of evidence between us like a sacred text. I opened it slowly, and one by one she read the documents. Her face didn't change much, but I noticed her eyebrows rise at the fake power of attorney. She tapped her pen twice on the forged signature. "Clean handwriting." "Sloppy fraud," she muttered. "They never expect anyone to fight back." When she got to the screenshots, Grayson's mocking comments, the meme about living fossils, the joke about my mind slipping, she paused. "Do you want this included?" she asked gently. "Absolutely," I said. "People need to know it wasn't just about money. It was about dignity." She nodded and added it to the growing pile of labeled exhibits. For the next hour, we created a roadmap. How to revoke his access, how to notify Social Security, how to file charges if needed, how to issue a cease and desist. Margot was thorough, professional, and most importantly, calm. But it was what she said next that shifted everything. "You could take this public," she said. "You have enough for a civil suit, and if you want to, we could escalate it. Financial elder abuse is a felony in this state." I didn't answer right away. Part of me still wanted to protect him. Another part wanted to burn down his carefully curated image of being the responsible son. But revenge wasn't the goal. Clarity was. "No courtrooms," I said finally. "But I want the truth to be known. Especially by him, and his friends, and anyone else who ever laughed." Margot leaned back in her chair. "Then let's build the moment." That night, I made a call I hadn't made in years to a woman named Margaret, the director of our local community center. I asked if they still hosted events. She said yes. I told her I wanted to book a space for Grayson's upcoming birthday. "But he doesn't know," I added. "It's a surprise." Margaret chuckled. "Well then, it's on the books as Mom's gift." I smiled, because that's what it would be, a gift of revelation. Over the next 2 weeks, I played my part like a seasoned actress. I asked Grayson what kind of cake he wanted this year, and he chuckled. "Ah, you don't have to do all that," I insisted. I dropped hints to Janine about inviting his friends. I coordinated with Margaret to set up the decorations just as Grayson liked them. Minimalist navy and gold with the phrase, "Another year, wiser," on the banner. That detail was my touch. Wiser indeed. Meanwhile, Margot handled the paperwork. Social Security was alerted. The forged POA was flagged. Grayson's access was suspended pending review. The old account I had kept hidden was transferred into a trust in my name. He didn't know any of it yet. That Friday, Janine dropped by to help me prep for the party. She didn't suspect a thing. She even brought custom party favors, little bags of candy with Grayson's initials on them. How poetic, I thought. Giving guests something sweet right before we serve the truth. At night, I lay awake rehearsing my words. I didn't want to scream. That would be too easy. I wanted stillness. I wanted silence between each sentence, heavy enough to make the air shake. The morning of the party, I wore a soft blue dress and combed my hair back like I used to when I hosted literacy nights at the library. Not glamorous, but clear, present. Mabel meowed at the door as I left as if asking, "Are you sure?" I nodded. Yes, it was time. Because sometimes the loudest justice arrives in the form of a microphone, a decorated cake, and the truth slipping out like a dagger wrapped in ribbon. And Grayson, he was about to realize that the woman he called a burden was the author of his unmaking. The room buzzed with polite conversation and the gentle clinking of plastic cups. Balloons floated overhead in gold and navy. Another year, Weiser hung above the buffet table like a dare. Grayson made his entrance in his usual weekend uniform, designer jeans, and smugness. He swept through the guests like a campaign trail, shaking hands, hugging Janine, throwing in a laugh that sounded rehearsed. I stood by the punch bowl unnoticed. Perfect. He finally spotted me and strolled over. "Mom, you didn't have to do all this." "I know," I said, "but I wanted to." He kissed my cheek absent-mindedly, already scanning the room. "We've got the whole crew here. Golf guys, high school pals, even some of Janine's yoga friends. You went all out." "Oh, I did," I said, sipping my punch. Every detail. He didn't notice the weight in my voice. Or if he did, he ignored it. That was his specialty, ignoring anything inconvenient. Janine clinked her glass. "Everyone, can I have your attention for a quick toast?" The room hushed. Grayson smiled wide, ready to absorb all the praise. Janine lifted her flute. "To Grayson, another year, wiser, stronger, and always taking care of those he loves." Everyone applauded. Grayson stepped forward, hands raised to deflect the praise like a man used to receiving it. "Thanks, everyone. Really. Just happy to be here with the people who matter most." That was my cue. I stepped up next to him and gently took the microphone from Janine's hand. "Before we cut the cake," I said, smiling at the crowd, "I'd like to say a few words. A mother's privilege." Grayson blinked. "Mom, you don't have to." I cut him off with a look. "I do." The room stilled. "I've spent most of my life being useful," I began. "As a librarian, a mother, a neighbor, a volunteer. I used to think that usefulness bought you protection. That if you gave enough love, money, trust, you'd be safe." I paused. "But I've learned something in this past year. Usefulness doesn't buy loyalty. It only buys time, until the people closest to you decide you're inconvenient." Grayson shifted beside me. Janine stiffened. I held up the folder I'd brought in my tote. "This is a list of every transaction, every change to my bank accounts, every time my access was revoked without consent. It's also a record of forged signatures, fraudulent documents, and mocking jokes shared behind my back." A murmur rippled through the room. Grayson's smile cracked. I turned toward him. "Do you remember what you wrote in your group chat, Grayson? About me being a social security check in a cardigan. About how I don't even know what day it is." He opened his mouth. I raised a hand. "No. You'll listen now." I turned back to the guests. "This man, my son, used my social security benefits to fund his lifestyle. He lied to his friends about being a hero caregiver while siphoning off my income. He forged my name while I was unconscious in recovery. And he laughed. People were no longer sipping punch. They were staring." I opened the folder and held up the copy of the forged document. "Here is the evidence. Not just of financial theft, but of something worse, of someone who decided their aging parent was a punchline." Grayson finally exploded. "This is insane. She's confused. She doesn't even know how banking works." I turned to him, calm as ever. "No, dear. What's insane is that you thought I'd forget how to read." Gasps followed. I looked around the room, locking eyes with a few guests I recognized from church, from book club, from my old library events. Elder abuse doesn't always look like bruises. Sometimes it looks like a gift basket and a locked bank account. Sometimes it sounds like, "We're tight this cycle." Oh, sometimes it looks like a birthday party. I handed the microphone back to Janine, who took it with shaking hands. Then I picked up my coat and folder and walked out the front door. No one stopped me. No one could, because the story had already shifted. I wasn't the relic in the room anymore. I was the author of the reckoning. I didn't look back. Not once. The moment I stepped outside, the wind hit my face like applause. It wasn't loud, but it was there, constant, affirming, alive. Mabel was waiting at the door of the cottage when I returned. She meowed once, low and long, and I whispered, "It's done." But it wasn't, not really. That night, I lit a candle and sat in my favorite chair by the window watching Grayson's house. The lights stayed on far longer than usual. I imagined the conversations. Janine asking if it was true, the guests replaying my words. The silence that follows truth when it's finally said out loud. I didn't sleep much. But I didn't toss either. I had made peace with something that night, not just exposing the truth, but choosing myself. By morning, the first blowback began. Grayson stormed into the cottage without knocking, his face flushed and wild. He held my manila folder like it was evidence from a crime scene. "You humiliated me," he hissed. "In front of everyone." I didn't flinch. "No." I corrected the record. "You've lost your mind," he snapped. "Do you know what you've done? People are calling. Clients. Friends." I had to delete my Facebook. "Oh no," I said, mock gasping. "Not Facebook." His eyes narrowed. "You don't get it. You've made me look like a monster." "You did that all on your own," I replied. "I just turned on the lights." He slammed the folder on the table. "You've ruined everything." "For what?" "Some sense of moral victory." "No," I said, rising to my feet, calm and firm. "For the same reason you installed those solar panels. Energy. Mine. I'm reclaiming what was stolen." He shook his head, laughing bitterly. "You think people will believe your story?" "They already do," I said. "And Social Security does too. So does the bank. So does Margot Dunn-esque." His mouth opened, but no words came out. "And just so you know," I added, "you're locked out of my accounts as of yesterday. Every dime you touched has been frozen. Every signature you faked has been flagged." He turned pale. "You wouldn't?" he whispered. "Oh, I already have," I said, stepping forward. "I told you once. I remember what matters." He looked like a man trying to stand in a flood. No foundation beneath his feet. Only panic. He stumbled back toward the door. "You're going to regret this?" he spat. "No, Grayson," I said quietly. "You are." He left. He didn't slam the door this time. He simply closed it like he was afraid of what might fall if it shook. The next few days passed in a strange peace. There were no dinner invitations, no forced errands, no lectures about bills. Janine didn't come around. The boys didn't wave from the yard. The silence was unfamiliar at first, but then it became beautiful. And then came the envelope. It arrived one Thursday morning in a plain white package. No return address. Inside was a letter typed from Grayson. He apologized. Sort of. He said things like, "If I overstepped, and I never meant to hurt you." Conditional remorse. Polished blame. But at the bottom, scribbled in handwriting I did recognize, were 4 small words. "Please don't press charges." I folded the letter and placed it in the folder with everything else. Not out of mercy, but because it wasn't my turn to speak anymore. It was the world's. The community center's staff had recorded my birthday speech. Unbeknownst to me, Margaret had posted it on the Senior Advocacy Board's website. Within a week, it went semi-viral, shared among elder rights groups, legal pages, and even a few local newspapers. Librarian turns the page on elder abuse. The headline made me laugh. It wasn't my best pun, but it worked. I received emails, messages from strangers, older women daughters, even a few young men saying, "Thank you. You said what we couldn't." One woman wrote, "My son controls everything. I thought I was crazy. You gave me a roadmap." Another, "I didn't know it had a name. Financial elder abuse. But it happened to me too." Each message was a thread weaving me into something larger. I wasn't alone. I never had been, and neither were they. Grayson stopped speaking to me altogether. The silence was a relief. But one evening I saw him in the yard, standing alone, looking toward the cottage. His shoulders slumped, his face older than it had been a month ago. I didn't wave. I didn't nod. Some chapters close without an epilogue. But mine, it was still being written. Because while he saw me as a punchline, I had become the paragraph that changed the story. It's funny how people come out of the woodwork once the dust settles. The week after the video went live, I got a call from our local NPR affiliate. A reporter named Camille wanted to do a piece on elder fraud and financial abuse. She'd seen the speech, and apparently it struck a chord. I think your story could help others, she said. I hesitated. I'd never liked microphones. But there was something noble in the request. She wasn't asking for gossip. She was asking for truth. So I said yes. Camille met me at the community center on a cool Tuesday morning. She was young, thoughtful, the kind of person who still took notes with pen and paper. I liked her instantly. She didn't prod or sensationalize. She asked me what I'd lived through, how it started, what it felt like to realize your own child saw you as a transaction. I told her everything calmly, factually, but not without weight. It was like being slowly erased, I said. At first, it's just small things, a password here, a bill there. Then suddenly, you're not even allowed to speak about your own money without being told you're confused. She looked up from her notebook. What gave you the courage to fight back? Cataloging, I said, smiling. You can't fight if you don't name things. And I named everything. The piece aired 2 days later. It wasn't dramatic. It was dignified. It gave space for women like me to be seen not as relics, but as witnesses. After that, more letters came. A woman in Maine whose son had remortgaged her home without telling her. A man in Arizona whose daughter sold his car and told him it was stolen. A retired nurse from Chicago who'd been moved into a temporary facility and never brought home. I read every word, and I wrote back. Because that's what I do. A week later, I started a group at the community center, small at first. Just 4 women, 1 man and me. We met every Thursday afternoon in the same room where Grayson's birthday banner once hung. We called ourselves the Ledger Circle. Our motto, what they erase, we rewrite. We shared our stories, compared notes, built support. Some just needed to talk. Others needed legal help. I connected them with Margot. Within a month, 3 of them had regained financial control. 1 had filed charges. All of them left the room with more than they brought in. That was the real revenge. Not the speech, not the frozen accounts, but the ripple, the echo of one voice becoming many. Grayson never apologized properly. Not really. He sent flowers once. Carnations. The kind people give out of obligation. I left them on the porch until they withered. He avoided me at public events. His friends, the Dad Bros United crowd, stopped coming around. Word got out. As it should have. But still, there were moments when I saw him watching from the window. Like he wanted to say something. Like he still believed there might be a version of me that would let it go. There wasn't. Forgiveness, you see, isn't always about them. Sometimes it's about saying, you don't get to steal from me, and call it love. And that's what I did. I forgave the boy who once believed I was a superhero librarian, but I did not forgive the man who turned my trust into currency. That distinction matters, because one is memory, the other is justice. That winter, I used part of my reclaimed funds to sponsor a new reading corner at the community center, not a memorial, but a living space. Bright cushions, large print books, a plaque that read, "For those finding their voice again, may you never be silenced twice." People came, they read, they sat with tea and stories and sometimes silence. And I sat with them. Grayson never set foot in the center again. But his absence was a kind of peace, because sometimes the only closure you need is knowing you opened a door others will walk through. The snow came early that year, thick wet flakes that blanketed the cottage roof like a hush. I always loved the quiet after a snowfall, not because it was peaceful, but because it made you notice every sound. A bird's wings, a shovel against pavement, the creak of steps. Silence like that doesn't erase. It reveals. And with winter came the day Grayson finally knocked. Not barged in, not shouted through the door. Knocked. It was a Sunday morning. The cottage smelled of cinnamon and old pages, and I had just poured myself coffee into my favorite chipped mug, the one with a faded quote from To Kill a Mockingbird. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view. I opened the door slowly. He looked thinner, paler. His hair wasn't gelled the way he usually liked it. His eyes for once didn't dodge mine. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside, saying nothing. He sat on the edge of the armchair like it might bite. Mabel jumped down from her perch and disappeared under the table. He didn't touch the tea I poured. "I don't know where to start," he said after a long pause. "Try the middle," I suggested. It's where you usually entered the story. He flinched, then nodded. I messed up. I said nothing. I thought I was helping. He continued. At first. And then I got used to it. The money, the power, it just became normal. That's how rot works, I said quietly. It spreads where it's warm. He looked at me sharply. You don't think I loved you? I think you loved what I gave you, I replied. But love isn't supposed to empty one person to fill another. He bowed his head. I've started seeing someone, he said, a therapist. She said I need to own what I did without expecting forgiveness. That's the smartest thing you've said in years. He almost smiled. Almost. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded paper. This is the last thing I'll give you. I'm signing over the cottage. It's yours. Clean. No liens. No loopholes. I owe you that. I took the paper. Read it. It was real. Simple. Clear. No strings. That's not what you owe me, I said, folding it gently. He looked up. You owe me growth. Change. That's the only thing that pays off. He nodded. I'll try. That, I said, is new. He stood. I won't bother you again, he said. But if you ever want to see the boys, I'll think about it. I said, not unkindly. They're not the ones who taught me silence. He swallowed hard, nodded once, and left. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't feel anything, but because some griefs don't require tears. They require distance, boundaries, paper trails, and healing. Later that week, I made a copy of the deed and added it to the folder my growing archive of dignity reclaimed. I labeled the tab, November. Acknowledgement. At last. I shared the moment at our next Ledger Circle meeting. The room was full now, over 20 members each with their own files, their own stories. One woman, Judith, whispered, "Do you think they ever truly change?" I thought about it. Some don't, I said. But we do. And that's enough. We lit candles that day. Not for loss, but for illumination. Because truth once spoken cannot be buried again. Outside, the snow had melted. The grass was muddy, messy, real. Like healing. And I, Eloise Marnell, was still writing. Still curating. Still alive. Not just in body, but in purpose. Because while Grayson once called me a joke, a check, a relic, I had become something else entirely. The reason other women stood taller when they spoke. December always made me nostalgic. It used to be my favorite time of year. The soft glow of lights, the hum of carols, the scent of cinnamon and old wood in the library when I stayed late to decorate the children's reading corner. Back then, Grayson would help string popcorn garlands. He was a thoughtful boy once. Or maybe he just mirrored my thoughtfulness before learning how to twist it. But this year, nostalgia came filtered through clarity. It was the first holiday in years I didn't spend in his house. No uncomfortable chairs. No passive-aggressive comments about how you're lucky. You don't have to cook anymore. No pretending. I decorated the cottage alone. A small pine wreath, paper stars, and a single string of warm lights that blinked like breathing. And then, 3 days before Christmas, a letter came. Not from Grayson. From Social Security. I sat down with my tea, slit the envelope, and unfolded the letter with slow, deliberate hands. It confirmed what Margot had promised. The fraudulent power of attorney was removed from their records. The official note read, "You are now and always have been the sole decision-maker for your benefits. Any previous unauthorized changes have been reversed and flagged." Enclosed was a check back pay for the diverted funds. I stared at it for a long time. Not because of the money, though. It was substantial. But because of what it represented. The system finally acknowledging what had been taken. Restitution is not restoration, but it is a beginning. I added the letter and checked to the folder labeling the tab. December. Rectification. That night, I made a pot roast. Just for me. I set the table with a cloth napkin, my good plate, and the silverware Grayson had once boxed up for storage. I poured a glass of wine and lit a candle, and I made a toast. To the women who stay quiet, I whispered until they don't. The next morning, a knock at the door startled me. It was Janine. She stood awkwardly holding a Tupperware container of sugar cookies shaped like stars. Her eyes were tired. "I won't stay," she said. "I just wanted to say I didn't know. Not all of it. I see him differently now." I nodded. She handed me the container. These were the boys' idea. They miss you. I took it gently. They're welcome to visit, I said. But next time you knock first. She nodded, wiping a tear before it fully formed, and walked away. I closed the door and stared at the cookies, clumsily frosted but genuine. The next Thursday, our ledger circle held a small holiday gathering. We wore silly sweaters, exchanged secondhand books, and read each other short letters of resilience. I brought copies of a new pamphlet I'd worked on with Margot. Know the Signs. Financial Abuse Checklist for Seniors. We printed 50. They were gone in 10 minutes. Judith brought homemade cider. Diane played the piano. Robert, a retired accountant who'd once been convinced to sell his home for investment opportunities, read a poem that made us all cry. We were not born to be storage bins for someone else's greed. We are the final authors of our own stories. I stayed late to clean up. As I wiped down the tables, I looked at the remaining folder copies and thought, maybe next year we print 500. When I returned to the cottage, I sat at my desk and opened my journal. Not the notebook for evidence. This one was bound in red leather, a gift from Margaret when the community center reading corner launched. I wrote, December 23rd. I am not what they called me. I am not the sum of what was taken. I am not the punchline. I am the pause, the silence that comes before the truth. And I've only just begun. Then I turned off the light and went to bed with a full heart, and not a single apology left unspoken in my chest. January arrived not with fireworks but with wind, cold, dry gusts that whistled through the edges of the cottage like a reminder. A new year had come, but old truths still stood. I used to hate January, the letdown after the holidays, the silence after the noise. But this time I welcomed it, because this year there would be no pretending, no family dinners built on performance, no manipulative apologies dressed as resolutions, just space and peace. I woke early on New Year's Day, made a pot of strong coffee, and watched the sunrise from my reading chair. I thought about everything that had been taken, yes, but more than that, I thought about everything I had reclaimed. Voice, choice, self. At noon, I walked to the community center. Margaret had asked if I'd say a few words at their annual Fresh Start gathering. I didn't prepare a speech. I didn't need one. When the moment came, I stepped to the front, adjusted my scarf, and looked at the small crowd of seniors and volunteers, many of whom now knew me not just as Eloise, but as the woman who made a son answer for the silence he thought was harmless. I cleared my throat. I used to believe that aging meant becoming invisible, that people would look through me, around me, but never at me, that my story, once long and full, would be reduced to the margins, receipts, prescriptions, reminders. A few heads nodded. But this past year taught me something different. It taught me that the world doesn't silence us because we have nothing left to say. It silences us because it's afraid of what we remember. Pause. The things they laughed at, I cataloged. The things they erased, I wrote again. And the person they thought was too old to matter. She became the footnote that changed the entire chapter. There was silence, then quiet applause. Not thunderous, not performative, but real. Later that afternoon, Judith approached me. She held out a small wrapped box. What's this? I asked. She smiled. Something you gave back to all of us. Inside was a custom-stamped seal like a librarian's tool, but instead of property of it read, Witnessed and remembered E.M. My throat caught. I hugged her. That night, back at the cottage, I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a letter to myself. Dear Eloise, you didn't lose. You didn't fade. You didn't forget. You remembered what mattered and reminded others how to do the same. You are not your son's actions. You are not your mistakes. You are not what they stole. You are the reason someone out there is holding a folder of receipts right now and whispering, me too. Keep writing. Keep remembering. Yours. You. I tucked the letter into the red leather journal, and I slept that night with the window cracked, letting the wind carry the truth into the new year. Not everyone gets justice, but some of us get to become it. February brought the first thaw, not of ice, but of memory. It came with a knock, not on the door this time, but on my email. Subject line: Your story inspired me. It was from a woman named Althea Chen, a social worker from Oregon who'd seen the NPR piece. She wrote, I've been working with elder clients for years, but your story gave me the courage to start something bigger, a task force for financial abuse recovery. We're naming it the Ledger Project in honor of your phrase. Would you consider being our honorary founding voice? I read the email 3 times. Then I closed my laptop and cried, not because I was sad, but because something I had written, something born of pain and silence, had taken root. I replied, yes, of course. And thank you. And I'm honored. And I'm still afraid sometimes, but I'll stand with you. We set up a video call 2 days later. Althea was sharp, kind-eyed, and surrounded by sticky notes on her wall. I could tell she was exhausted in that good, purposeful way. We want to start with 20 families in recovery, she said. But eventually I'd love to see it in every state. I nodded. Start small, but think big. That's exactly what I told the team, she said. And they keep quoting your line. Forgiveness isn't free. It costs growth. I smiled. I had forgotten saying it. But I suppose when you live your words, they echo. That same week, Margaret asked me if I'd speak at the spring fundraiser for the community center. Apparently, donations had doubled since the video. People wanted to support elder voices, not just mine, theirs. In preparation, I went through my old notebooks. Some were grim, the accounting of what was lost, what was stolen, what was said. But others, newer ones, were filled with stories from the Ledger Circle. Wins, letters, moments. One entry read, Judith bought her own groceries today without asking her son for money. First time in 6 years. Another, Robert filed taxes under his own name for the first time since his daughter declared him mentally fatigued. These weren't just entries. They were victories. And I began to see something clearer than I ever had before. My story wasn't about revenge. It was about re-entry, into power, into authorship, into choice. That Friday, I treated myself to a new coat, not black or gray, but marigold yellow. It was impractical, bright, unapologetic. It made me look like sunlight, and I wore it to the Ledger Circle's Valentine's potluck without shame. Grayson wasn't mentioned much anymore. The community had drawn its own conclusions, and I didn't need to explain. He hadn't reached out since Christmas, but he did send a single card on Valentine's Day, just my name on the front, handwritten. Inside, a Polaroid. Me at his college graduation, arms around him, smiling like the world had finally gone quiet. No note, no apology, just a memory offered like a Band-Aid. I didn't respond, but I didn't tear it up either. I slid it into the back of my journal behind the page that read, You are not the punchline. You are the whole chapter. Because even wounds, when healed, leave outlines. And sometimes we keep them not for mourning but for mapping, so that others can see where we've been and how far we've come. March opened like a book I'd already read. Familiar wind, the distant smell of thawing earth, daffodils peeking from stubborn soil. But this year the page had turned. At the community center, the Ledger Circle was now 2 circles. We'd grown not by shouting, not by marketing, but by whisper. Word of mouth. One neighbor telling another, go. She'll understand. And I did. We now had volunteers, younger ones, college students earning credits, paralegals doing pro bono work, and even a few adult children trying to make amends. They didn't ask for applause. They just listened, and that was enough. One morning, a new member named Alice joined us. She was quiet, elegant, wore scarves like armor. It took 3 sessions before she spoke. My daughter, she began one afternoon, voice barely above a breath, said I needed to be protected. Then she sold my house and moved me into her guest room. I haven't had my own mail in 14 months. Silence settled over the group like snowfall. I reached across the table and touched her hand. You do now. We printed out a checklist for her, connected her with Margot, helped her build her file. The folder grew thick in 1 week. She labeled it, My Life Unredacted. I smiled. You'll fit in fine. Outside the meeting room, someone had hung a bulletin board labeled Firsts. Members had started pinning notes to it, each one written on a library catalog card. First solo grocery trip in 3 years. Roberta. I have a PIN code now. No one else knows it. Jerome. Told my daughter no and didn't explain. Dolores. Opened a new checking account. Mine. Alice. Every time I passed it, I stopped. Not to gawk, but to witness. This was what legacy looked like. Not wealth, not inheritance, not even apology, but reclamation. Margot called one morning to let me know that the Ledger Project had secured its first state grant. They wanted to expand to 3 more cities by summer. They're asking for a name, she said. Not a brand. A person, someone to be the face. Eloise. I laughed. This face. It's older than your software. She chuckled. It's honest. That's harder to come by. I said yes, not out of vanity, but because truth should always have a face. Later that month, I was invited to speak at a local high school's social justice class. Teenagers, tired-eyed, phone-heavy, resistant yet curious. One boy asked me, "Why didn't you just yell, or sue?" I smiled. Because yelling is loud, but lasting is louder. That caught his attention. I told them about the checkbook, the cottage, the night I cataloged betrayal and started keeping score. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with sirens, I said. It walks in slowly, with folders and facts and women who've stopped apologizing for being inconvenient. At the end, they applauded. A few even stood. Afterward, a girl lingered near the door. She was small, maybe 16, with ink-stained fingers and a quiet jaw. My grandma's going through this, she said. She doesn't think anyone will believe her. I looked her in the eye. Tell her I already do. She nodded. Can I bring her next week? Yes, I said. Bring her home. That night, I walked back to the cottage and sat with Mabel at my feet, journal open, pen in hand. I wrote, March 20th. Today I wasn't a victim. I wasn't even a survivor. I was a witness who taught others to see. And that I've come to believe is the most powerful thing a forgotten woman can become. Not remembered, but remembered for reminding others. April brought the dogwood blooms, white and pink petals scattered across the community center walkway, like soft confetti as if spring itself was celebrating us. It was our 1-year anniversary of the Ledger Circle, and we held the meeting outside for the first time. Folding chairs on the lawn, coffee in travel mugs, the wind flipping open the edges of our folders like curious fingers. We laughed more than usual that day, not because we'd forgotten the pain, but because we'd finally alchemized it. Judith brought a cake, not store-bought, but one she had made with her granddaughter. Lemon, her favorite. She stood up in her cardigan with the fraying sleeves and raised a plastic fork like a sword. 1 year ago, I couldn't even name what was happening to me, she said. Now I help other women name it before it eats them whole. Applause followed, soft but rooted, real. And then the unexpected happened. Grayson arrived. He didn't park in front. He walked from around the corner wearing a neutral jacket, holding a notebook. Not a laptop, not his phone. A spiral-bound notebook. He stood at the edge of the circle, unsure. Everyone noticed. I stood. Would you like to say something? I asked. He nodded. I gestured to a chair. He sat visibly uncomfortable but not fleeing. I'm not here to be forgiven, he said. Voice hoarse. I'm here because I've been attending a different group, one for caregivers who crossed lines. Everyone went still. I spent years telling myself I was protecting her, he said, gesturing toward me. But I wasn't. I was protecting myself from feeling like I hadn't done enough in my own life. He glanced at me. It was easier to make her small than to face how small I'd become. A breath passed through the group like wind through chimes. I've written down everything I took, he continued. Every time I intercepted a document, made a choice without asking, every comment I made to friends. And I'd like to leave this here. For the record. He held up the notebook. I looked at it. I did not take it from his hand. But I nodded. You can leave it on the table. He did. Then he stood. I won't stay, he said. But thank you for letting me witness what dignity really looks like. He left without another word. Silence followed. Alice, always the quietest, broke it. Well, she said, that was the most useful thing he's ever done. Laughter erupted. Not cruel. Cathartic. I walked to the table and opened the notebook. It was handwritten. Page after page. Itemized. Labeled. It didn't erase what he'd done, but it was documentation. And in our world, documentation is sacred. Later that week, I locked the notebook away with the rest of my archives. Not in anger, but because truth, when finally named, deserves a resting place. Then I opened my red leather journal and wrote the final lines of the story that had started in a whisper. April 26th. He came. He named it. I stayed seated. That was the victory. My story does not end with forgiveness. It ends with legacy. Because some mothers leave behind homes, others bank accounts. But I left behind a room full of women who now own their voices. And that truly is the only inheritance I ever cared to give. They used to say I was expired, too old to understand, too tired to matter. I was background noise in my own life, a blur in family photos, a checkbox on someone else's tax form. But here's what they forgot. An expired book is not unread. A quiet woman is not unwise. And dignity, though delayed, is never truly lost. In the years since I reclaimed my story, I've watched ripples turn into waves. Ledger circles have sprouted in towns I've never visited. Retired teachers, widowed nurses, once isolated fathers, all stepping into rooms, opening folders, saying out loud, "This happened to me too." And in those rooms, no one laughs at their age. We catalog, we listen, we rebuild. As for Grayson, we remain distant, civil but not repaired. Some rifts are too honest to mend, but I no longer need his apology like I once did. The silence between us is no longer hollow, it's healthy. And that cottage, the one he tried to make into a cage, it's become a sanctuary. A place where people come to talk, to cry, to heal. There's always tea, and always an empty chair. In the end, I never wanted revenge. I wanted recognition, and I got it. Not in headlines, but in the hush that follows truth. So if you're listening, if you're older, overlooked, underestimated, know this. You are not a burden. You are not a relic. You are not expired. You are a story still unfolding. And someone somewhere is waiting to hear it. So write it, tell it, live it. Because sometimes the best punchline is survival.